And our next speaker is someone from a little closer to home. I'd like to welcome John Duignan, the author of The Complex, to the stage.
It's a laptop. I don't know what to do with laptops. Right, my name is John Duignan, for those who don't know me. I spent 22 years in the Sea Org as a bus driver, according to OSA. So that would mean that I was driving low-level estates personnel like Jerry Armstrong and Mike Rinder, dishwashers, around. That was my entire career in the Sea Org, which is why they sent a company called Carter Ruck, which is one of the biggest and most vicious rival companies in the world, after me when I produced a book about my experiences as a bus driver. So I just thought I'd frame my experience that way. The actual story behind the OSA statement that I was a bus driver, indeed I did drive buses for a short while in the Sea Organization. What preempted that experience was that I was working on a project in southern England whereby a woman, surprisingly, had been mistreated by Scientology severely to the extent that she almost committed suicide. She lost her family, she lost a husband, and a very typical Scientology bridge experience, actually. There's nothing unusual about that at all. The unusual thing was that she sued them for every damn thing they had, and she was threatening, she was the one person who threatened the corporation of Kozrecki, which is the Church of Scientology Religious Educational College International, or something like that, or Incorporated, something like that. I was sent down to shut her up. And the way we were going to shut her up was to give her just under £1 million sterling, more or less, in her hand. So my job was to go down and find the £1 million sterling, because contrary to what a lot of people seem to understand, if Scientology has got a financial problem, now it's a corporation, it's worth, at least from what we understand, at least $4 billion in actual cash asset as opposed to physical asset like buildings. So it's worth about $4 billion, and yet it will never spend that money on the ground to solve a problem. It will raise the money from parishioners on the ground to solve the problem. Now, I know that sounds a bit convoluted, but that's why they have several billion stashed away in Liechtenstein and Luxembourg. So my job was to go down and to rescue the corporation of Scientology. And for 6 months I lived on more or less £5 a week, and myself and with other groups of some Sea Org members, mostly mission staff down in Dorset, we would raise 10 grand, 100 grand, and I'd see this money coming in, and I was scraping around to find a little bit of stale bread. I mean, literally, this is how it was. I was trying to find some stale bread and stuff in order to survive. Sometimes I would get a little bit of dry tobacco. I was a smoker back then. And this was a person on a job dealing with almost £1 million worth of money to try and buy off a very important legal suit. During that period, I began to question Scientology. Why? But I did. I began to question what the heck is going on here. And I came across a book in a bookshop, and the book was essentially it was a modern version, or an updated, simplified, abridged version of a compendium, a 1757 compendium called The Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire, which was a big 13-volume. Sorry, that's not the correct. It's Gibbons, if you want to look it up. Gibbons wrote this fantastic history of the various Roman emperors, right? And in a fundamental course that all Scientologists do, Sea Org member, no matter who you are, if you're in Scientology, you would have done the student hat. And in there, Hubbard makes this fantastic claim. He says he got these Gibbons volumes, 13 Gibbons volumes, written in 1757, in, again, that sort of I suppose, rather stilted 17th century English. And he said that he read them over a weekend. He was bored and he read them over a weekend. And of course, we as Scientologists and Sea Org members, we were like, how wonderful. Oh my gosh, he's such a genius. He is the Messiah. Yeah. We actually didn't, and I don't know anybody who actually questioned this statement. But while I was in Pullen Dorset, I somehow, at one point, must have an extra £2 with me, because I walked into a bookshop, a second-hand bookshop, and I found this abridged 1963 book called The Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire, Gibbons, and it said it was a abridged version, and it was about the size of, I don't know, a John Grisham novel. And all of a sudden, something clicked in my head, and I said, there's something very odd going on here. So questions suddenly began to, I suppose I had a bit of something to grasp onto. I think any Scientologist will tell you, any Scientologist, if they're honest with you, will say they go through regular periods of almost eviscerating doubt, is the best way to say it. But the pressures upon you within this, a group pressure, and there are, what are the pressures? There are pressures of programming, of conditioning, that are on you, which overwhelm that doubt. But it's something that can kind of tear you apart as you go along. And the doubt needs something to grip onto, if you like, in order to act upon it. It needs something solid. And so for me, that was it. It was this book. This was it. Hubbard had told a big, fat, porky lie. And something needs to change here, you know. And there's me sort of like living on stale bread kind of thing. And I've got to take on Scientology. Anyway, I went back to St. Hill. I think I was fighting with IAS people. And the reason I was fighting with IAS people is because while I was trying to raise this money from local parishioners who already were more or less broke, I was furthering the frankly fraudulent financial activities that had been going on in that place for so many years that caused the problem in the first place. And then the IAS people wanted to come down, and on top of my raising that almost £1 million, they wanted to raise extra, I think it was, how much was it? I think they wanted to raise an extra 200,000 for their own campaign from the same small pool of very, very stressed Scientologists who were giving everything that they were giving in order to try and keep Scientology going in that area. And I began to fight this, and I began to have these fights with IAS people who would come down, and I would kick them out because I said, well, I'm running this place, I'm going to kick you out. Senior IAS guys would be on the phone, yelling down the phone to me, saying, you better allow our guys to get down there and raise the money, whatever they were saying. So these battles went on and on and on. But RTC got wind of it, and they were a bit upset. So when I got back to St. Hill after having raised the money and having solved this problem, not myself, it was myself and a few other people, obviously. But once the problem went away, so I go back to St. Hill, and I get grabbed by security and the RTC rep, and I get locked in a room, and the RTC rep, with 2 or 3 security guys standing outside the door, screams at me for 2 hours solid, trying to get me to confess what the heck I was up to. And things kind of came to a head, and I looked at this woman, and I said, I'm not afraid of you guys anymore. Fuck you, essentially is what I said. I said this to this woman. And I was said, okay, I'm going to root out of Scientology. I'm going to root out of this stuff. It's crazy. So they put me on to help the bus driver to keep the buses in shape. So I ended up helping him put engines in and gearboxes and whatever it was. And of course, the way it goes, there's kind of an ongoing. It's a process of attrition. They break you down. They wear you out, and eventually they kind of wore me out in my efforts to leave. In other words, I wanted to leave standardly. I couldn't imagine the idea of blowing at that point. I couldn't imagine the idea of taking my life into my own hands and actually, just going. I couldn't do that somehow. But they broke me down. I ended up running the whole transport situation in St. Hill. And that led on to other interesting things. And so that's their claim, that I spent my time in the Sea Org as a bus driver. So there you go. So I am an SP bus driver. I am going to sort of, in terms of, for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to leave my framework lecture thing that I wanted to do at that, and I'm going to open the floor for any questions. So if anybody who's got any questions about my life in the Sea Org, or what led me to the Sea Org, or why I'm now an SP, I am quite happy to answer any questions.
Just one thing. Could
yes?
you perhaps explain what is an SP?
Oh, yes. An SP, super person. No, it's a suppressive person. It's a designation that Scientology uses, I suppose, to excommunicate people who might upset the conditioning that Scientology does to people in order to make them cough and make them worship the great leader and whatever else. People who kind of wake up a little bit are immediately designated SP. And in the Sea Org, the trick is now, they used to kick them out straight away and put them out back into circulation in the WOG world, which is the real world. But what they do now is that they will declare the Sea Org member SP and put them onto the RPF. This is a Rehabilitation Project Force, which really, if you think of the Chinese re-education camps, or the kind of those kind of extreme communist programming systems that were used to re-educate citizens, it's akin to that basically. But you can't really get out of them now at the moment, because they're very, very secure. It's watched the whole time, 24 hours a day. Any mail, any letters you might want to write home to your family are read by the RPF people in charge. Any phone calls you make, you've got 2 security people sitting next to you. And if you're talking, "Hi, Mum, how are you doing?" Everything you say is being monitored very, very, very closely indeed. So that's the RPF basically. When you're declared, you have to do your full, what's called there's a program basically to rehabilitate you as a Sea Org member, which means it breaks you down basically. So at the end of the RPF, you're a fundamentally very, very broken person, and you will say anything or do anything to get out of that horrific regime that comprises the RPF. So that's kind of an SP. The idea of being an SP is someone who is against Scientology. So pretty much everybody here would be an SP. You should be ashamed of yourselves. So, is there any questions at all?
Just an interesting point about this re-education concept.
Yes.
This is recently yesterday a news effect from Royal Sports, one of the biggest booking companies in the country.
Yes.
And they're using Tony Quinn's, every staff member has to take training as part of it. They can lose their job if they don't.
Right.
I wonder where you got that one before. It's an interesting, this was Tony Quinn, guru fellow here, had relations with Scientology about taking various people.
Oh, completely not. Again, I think for anybody who's not really been following that field, I think that the whole cultic community are promiscuous in the extreme. I do believe that they share information. In fact, I remember it was probably Jerry Armstrong, when he speaks, will probably tell you a bit more on this, but it was a policy to befriend other cultic groups. In other words, like-minded groups. So Scientology is very much in bed with the Moonies, for instance. And when I was in the Sea Org in Scotland, I actually worked with the Moonies in Scotland. And then in Dublin here, of course, we've seen Jerry working here with, what's his name, Jerry Ryan? Jared Ryan. He's the Scientology PR, Scientology out PR. and he works with the Moonies here very, very closely. So yeah, these links, these kind of promiscuous links exist. So Tony Quinn, absolutely down the line, he's that kind of personality, a narcissistic personality who would love what Scientology does, but wants the glory for him, not for the young Miscavige. Sorry, anyone?
Question about the mental health members. I believe in your book you describe having a mental breakdown fairly early on in your Scientology career. That's correct.
Yes.
And I don't know, it's been too long since I read it, but you casually state that most Scientologists go through this. Could you elaborate a little bit?
Yes, I'll reword that a little bit. I think an awful lot of Scientologists go through that. Around the period of OT3, for instance, a huge amount of people will go what is called in Scientology terms type 3. And that literally would be equivalent to a complete mental breakdown, a nervous breakdown, whatever it's described as. My own experience was that I think I was in a very vulnerable state anyway. I was not a healthy, strong, mentally together human being when I bumped into Scientology, and I think they saw that, and that's why the hooks went into me very, very quickly. But when, I suppose my grasp on things was a bit tenuous, my grasp on real life was a bit tenuous, so my experience was that I got exposed to some Hubbard lectures about him doing the Grand Tour. And the Grand Tour was where Hubbard exteriorized from his body and went on a little trip around the main planets in our system. And I think that's where he saw the steam train on Venus, I think it was. But I suppose for someone who was kind of a bit mentally in not in a very good way, it somehow unsettled whatever little bits of grasp, whatever foundation, whatever little bits of ground I was standing on mentally. And that seemed to I bought into it, and the whole idea of having lived before, that actually the way I look at the world, the way I perceive the world is not the way it really is. There was nothing solid anymore. And it seems like for me, the ground sort of collapsed under me. And I woke up in the morning completely, I don't know if you read about disassociation, it's the idea that you feel separate from yourself. And so I woke up the next morning at 6 o'clock in the morning, feeling like I was floating above my body, and it was a desperately disconcerting experience. And then when I sort of came back into my body or whatever it was, I was quite suicidal. And I was looking for ways to kill myself, but I was staff member at that time in Stuttgart Mission, and of course it's not good PR to have your staff kill themselves. So they put me under what's called the baby watch, and I was under watch then for solidly for a couple of days and guided everywhere, and I'd be looking and said, I want that knife because I want to cut my wrist, and said, no, you're not going to do it. So I suppose they stopped me doing that. But then I was put into a session, and I believe, what's the session called again? I forget what this session called. Interiorization rundown. So yeah, but I was run on 1 or 2 sessions of what's called the interiorization rundown, which I suppose does what it says on the box. And it was, I must admit, the guy auditing me was Swiss German. I speak German. I speak mainly Schwabish German, but I'm not sure I understood his words very well. I don't ever recall of exactly what he said. But coming out of that session, I was a dedicated Scientologist, and that was it. And I joined the Sea Org within a few weeks of that. Now, a lot of people who are doing OT3, I've had some terribly good, really close friends who I've seen the exact same thing happen to them. And often, quite often worse, often extreme psychosis has been brought on. They've been under watches for weeks at a time. Some of you may have heard of Lisa McPherson. Lisa McPherson is one of those people who went through a similar experience. Unfortunately, the outcome for her was death. But other people seem to get through it and then become very dedicated OT committee members, or they buy the rest of their bridge. I don't fully understand it, but something breaks down. Something breaks down in the mind. The mind's defenses break down or something. I don't know how else to describe it, but it's frightening. It's frightening to be there. That's all I can say. Anything else? Yeah. Well, I suppose the difference is the Sea Organization, again, for those who don't know, is a quasi-military operation. It is, I suppose, it looks military. It feels, I don't know what military feels like. I've never been in the army. Well, I used to work with the American Army, and I must say the American Army looked like a holiday camp compared to the Sea Organization. I must admit. But what's a day-to-day life? I suppose if you can imagine no freedom whatsoever, yeah, and being made to, having to work, being compelled to work at whatever task, whether you're a cook or whether you're a graphic designer or whatever, you're compelled to work insane hours. I mean, an example would be, I worked for, I think it was, this is quite common again, I mean a lot of CR members will tell you, but I worked for, I think it was 7 days and 7 nights straight, non-stop, no sleep, solid, in order to get a certain magazine production thing done. There was no sleep whatsoever. I was a complete basket case at the end of that. It wasn't a basket case already for being in Scientology, but more of a basket case. But I'm trying to frame what it's like. It's so different to what real life is like in the real world. In any real normal organization, there is certain there's safety measures put in there. There's laws regarding I suppose sick leave, holiday leave, pregnancy leave, whatever else. None of that exists. They've got complete control over you, and you are literally, you are a tool. You're a tool in both senses of the word. You're a tool for you, but you know, you are a tool of the organization. That's how they use you. Our hours were, I mean, I'm trying to remember now. I suppose often, I mean, I'd start at 8 o'clock in the morning often, and I'd finish at 3 o'clock, or 4 o'clock, or 5 o'clock. I'd get 2 hours sleep, and that's when I was driving. You know, I was driving people around in minibuses with 2 hours sleep. I mean, you know, health and safety is really in there. I mean, bam. I don't know. I mean, that's kind of a description of what it felt like to be there. You had no freedom. You had no space. And it applied for everybody from little kids all the way up to, I mean, little kids to 8 years old. I mean, all the way up to people 75, 80 years old. Not good. Anyway, I suppose I'd better let someone else on.
Sure. Thank you.